Very excited to have Rick Allen, who just flew in from Washington, D.C. to be here in Rome. I was introduced to Rick through Mike Vorhaus from Vorhaus Advisors, who is a great sponsor, amazing friend, but a wonderful supporter of Techtalia. So, Rick, very excited to have you here. Let's get going.
Thank you.
Let's get into it. So, Rick, can you actually give us a little bit about your background before we even get into anything?
Well, I was a practicing lawyer in Los Angeles for many years, and then I was CEO of a conglomerate, a group of companies, which, among other things, was involved with the Versace franchise in the Western United States. But we did an awful lot of things: real estate, fashion, technology, a number of things. And then I was in the Clinton White House putting together the domestic Peace Corps that became AmeriCorps. Went to Discovery to help the founder of Discovery extend that brand beyond the television screen. Ran National Geographic, launched the cable channel for them, got them into feature films. Ran a sports media company for Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. And then started a company in 2007 with Ted Leonsis, who is a pretty legendary tech entrepreneur. He and Steve Case were together at AOL. Steve is also one of our investors. And our company is called Viewlift, and it began by streaming movies for folks in the independent film and television world and helping them reach an audience at a time when Netflix was still sending around DVDs and YouTube really didn't have much of an audience except for the funny cat stuff. And it was Ted's idea that we could use streaming technology because it would get very rapidly to sufficient high quality to be worth seeing long-form entertainment. But what we found by 2014 was that the most valuable thing we had created was the technology platform to actually stream and monetize it and have those tools. And that was a very big surprise for me and a significant pivot for the company. So we rebranded it as Viewlift and focused on providing it to entertainment companies, sports teams and leagues and others.
So, okay, we don't know each other that well, but I am going to move your mic
over
here.
Yeah,
Sorry about
sliding.
that.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that. Okay, why Italy? Why did you decide to come to Techtalia? I know we know Vorhaus and everything, but this is an intimate event. We're obviously zooming and streaming to the world, but you flew all the way from D.C. to be here. It means a lot to all of us, but why?
Well, I guess part of it was coming back to the neighborhood. My mom's family is from Lucca in Tuscany, so any chance to get back to Italy is something that I prize, and I appreciate the invitation. We also have clients here. We represent the Italian pro basketball leagues, so I wanted to see them and our clients in London beforehand. But it also is an interesting conference because it combines so many different disciplines, and the first panel was a perfect indication of that, I think. And I find that invigorating myself, and hopefully in talking about entrepreneurial stories throughout my career, it may be helpful to others.
So let's get into some of those stories. When we were talking on the phone when we first met, I was thinking about this panel, or this conversation, a lot because you have an incredible wealth of experience in both the political and business landscape. Can you tell us one fun anecdote from,
oh boy.
I mean, I'm sure you have plenty, but that would be meaningful for us to hear, and how you maybe even applied what you learned in that to when you became founding CEO of Viewlift. It's a double question, but
I guess what I'd point to is that when I was with President Clinton and in the White House, the stakes on the issues we were working on were exceptionally high visibility, and one believed that they were going to have impact on hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people. Very rarely are the stakes that big in business. And so one of the lessons I took out of that is don't take yourself too terribly seriously.
Which is that's a hard lesson to learn.
Particularly as an entrepreneur, because you're pouring your passion into your baby. And if you don't take it seriously and don't put the work in, as we just heard, you're not going to be successful. But I think also you have to recognize that things are going to go wrong, and they're going to go differently than you ever planned. And you can ride your original vision too far. Mm-hmm. If we had stuck with our initial plan to serve independent filmmakers, we wouldn't have a company now. There just really wasn't a business in it, largely because of inability to market unknown talent. So you have to be prepared to pivot, and part of that is some sense of personal humility that you didn't get your business plan on stone tablets that came down the mountain. So.
And okay, so prior to politics, or I think maybe it was after politics, when you were CEO of National Geographic for the for-profit arm, how was it different between being CEO of an operation that was effective, it was a turnaround, right, to make it the success that it is today? How is it different than being CEO of something that's a little bit more entrepreneurial and doesn't have a history, so that you could have done a pivot? Like what have you seen are the differences in leadership particularly?
Well, I had, I think, 1,100 or so people working for me at National Geographic. Yeah. So, scale is different. The brand was then 100, I think when I took over, it was 108 years old. And that legacy is a huge asset and also a potentially disastrous history had we followed it through what the brand was best known at the time. But starting up entities, and we started up the channel, and we started up an awful lot of businesses, is a lot easier to do in the context of a company if the person who's at the head of the company is in there to make change. Quite often, folks who have become CEOs are there for preservation. I took that position with the understanding that I was supposed to move fast and break things, and your friend Zuck's phrase. But if you're prepared to do that and make change and take the consequences for it, it's great to have real assets, really smart people, tremendous content assets.
And a strong vision of where it wants to go. Even if you have to pivot, you need a strong vision there to, I guess, lead the startuppers, right, that are a part of it, because you're a small company compared to another Google or whatever, right? Yes. Like whatever the comparison would be. So do you think it's a difference in how you inspired the 1,100 employees versus the size of the work, the family, as I always like to say, the family of the family of employees at Viewlift? Is it a different inspiration or talks that you'd have to give as, I'm thinking through that, like as CEO, when you talk to the group of people, what's that like?
As you know, you've got a whole series of stakeholders because you've got your colleagues, you have a board. In the private sector, you have investors. National Geographic, the society is a not-for-profit, and they own the for-profit businesses that I was running. And you have to serve all of those shareholders. And the similar principles of respecting people, looking for talent, trying to associate talent, creating an environment where people feel comfortable failing so that they can ultimately learn and succeed. I think those are true of any organization. But I know you follow Reid Hoffman.
Of course. And I made I made a mistake in the name of the book. It's Masters of Scale, not Scale Up.
Yep.
So,
Well, and Masters of Scale has, in one of its episodes, the former Pepsi CEO, and she was talking about what it's like to run an absolutely gigantic company. And the motivations are different. The number of people you can impact are obviously different. Mm-hmm. She had to kind of work at the senior-most level of management. I had come out of a challenge because we put a government corporation together to create AmeriCorps. So it was a new structure that had not existed in American history. And then we had startups in all 50 states with the governors of those states.
And what year was this? And
1993. Bill Clinton came in January 93.
Can you give us one sentence on AmeriCorps? Just because I think some people, global audience, or
the easiest way to think about it is a domestic version of the Peace Corps. So it's people, generally young people, but not exclusively, who are serving in their communities in the United States for 1 to 2 years. They don't really get enough sustenance to be able to support themselves in most instances. They get tuition relief or a stipend towards college if they're headed to college next. And they do everything from inoculating babies to being teachers' assistants in schools to helping to do environmental remediation, a lot of disaster relief stuff. We got really, really good in that. But it was a political problem to create it at the time when Newt Gingrich was just starting to come up on the Republican side of the American House of Representatives. But it was a business question about how you create something where you don't have the standard motivation you have in the private sector to reward people.
Or rewards.
Equity and, frankly, salary that's at a market level.
Right.
So, yeah.
Taking it more into today, we have a very diverse audience, business backgrounds, professionals. We actually even have a doctor. With Viewlift, helping content owners, basically stream their content globally. Why is that relevant to our global audience today? And what do you think about what you guys have built for the world?
I think streaming technology and how it's utilized in the next iterations that are coming in front of us and that we heard, particularly in the first panel, I think it's absolutely vital. And the issue is it's very difficult as a content creator to know in advance specifically who is the person who will want that content. It's tough in terms of actual goods. The Versace audience, buyers of the Versace line in the late 80s, early 90s, had an enormous diversity. I mean, there was a very specific sense of a Hollywood type who would wear the line, but in fact, it stretched much wider. In the digital content creation world, it's endless and everybody, everywhere, at all times. And so the issue is you're going to make it easy for the content creator to find that audience. Can you give them the tools to monetize it? And is the streamed experience going to be something that are going to delight people and bring them back and put them in a position where they're going to put money into the system either by watching advertising, by following sponsors, by buying a subscription like a Netflix. And we've been on kind of the cutting edge of that, particularly in going very early into over-the-top devices. We were the 11th developer on an iPad. We were Roku's first long-form entertainment channel. So thanks to the backing of our board, we went into these areas early, and we've now been in them their entire kind of life history.
So I have another question based on that, not one that we even discussed before. I think networking is incredibly important. Who you know is very important, and who you know and who can unlock doors for you is incredibly important as an entrepreneur. Do you think from the political experience you have, plus the intrapreneurial and entrepreneurial experience, has your network help you succeed beyond just yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I should have responded to it in one of the earlier questions as well. In Los Angeles, in the initial group of companies I was running, I was 29 years old when I started. I was so completely unqualified that it's hard even to think about it. But my partner and chairman gave me a chance to kind of learn under him. And in California, because I was very involved in politics, particularly the media industry was tremendously involved in politics. That was the engine that kind of drove American politics. And so I had an awful lot of contacts in the media world before I was ever working in the media world. So that was exceptionally helpful. And it works in the other direction as well. The people you do business with tend to be the folks that you involve in campaigns and in efforts, same as in the nonprofit world. But it expands the context because life is about Venn diagrams. And everything's not going to sit in the middle. And so you better have large circles that you're affiliating to open your mind, but also give you the connections to take an idea out into fruition.
So do you think, as let's say we have some young entrepreneurs, but I would not say necessarily based on age, entrepreneurs that are early on in their journey, how would they go about, thinking about from a networking perspective? Would they look at it from their, current network of the person that they know, the next person, or would it be some cold outreach? What would you suggest, from your position where somebody would just come into your office and ask you that question?
I get asked that a lot, and most of the people I know in business get asked that a lot. So there is a lot of absolute cold calling. And even, again, I'll speak personally, I don't end up being useful to an awful lot of the people who reach out to me. And it isn't because of lack of intention or a lack of desire to help. It's more time management. But I think you should never be at all nervous as an entrepreneur and looking foolish. That's the expectation that should happen to you a number of times a day, or you're not pushing yourself hard enough.
On that point of looking foolish, how long did it take for you to become comfortable with the idea of looking foolish?
I was thinking about this. I've been driving around Italy.
I still have a problem with that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'll
even when we first were talking, I was like, okay, I'm getting the Zoom call ready and making sure my background looked okay, and my hair, and it's not, I don't look crazy, and
we're all individuals. We all have egos, and we're all capable of being embarrassed. And so I wish I could tell you, it was day 696. Who knows? I get embarrassed at all sorts of things all the time, but at least with respect to business, you have to feel comfortable asking a lot of questions that may seem stupid. And I just had this conversation with a young entrepreneur and also with a colleague of mine. And I said, we just did this call together with a potential client who used an acronym for something. And I don't think you know what that acronym means. And he said, didn't have a clue. I said, okay, let me give you permission under any circumstance with me on client calls, on pitches, just say, excuse me, I don't know what that word means, or I don't know what that word means in this circumstance. The worst thing they can think is, gosh, I really would have thought you would have known it, and that's gone in a second. Meanwhile, you're frantically trying to catch up if you didn't understand what it was and see it in context. So that's a small thing. But I think just in general, you have to, in the same way that products have to be developed and put out into a digital marketplace to be tested by real audiences, you've kind of got to do that with everything you're doing in terms of pitching, growing, or running a business.
Okay, we're going to go on a little different track here. You're also an author. You've known the Kennedy family for a very long time. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the 2 volumes you wrote about Robert Kennedy?
Robert Kennedy had a bigger impact on me. He died when I was 14 than anybody before or since. So the first book grew out of my experience in politics in my 20s, where I was running campaigns in California or for people who were running elsewhere but coming to California to meet folks and raise money. And I was bringing young people, particularly folks in Hollywood, into the political process on issues and for candidates. And they had no idea who Robert Kennedy was because they weren't alive when he was killed. And great biographies out there, but if you wanted to read what the man said himself, you couldn't find it. And so I wanted to bring out his speeches with the context of the narrative weave of his life and times around them so you could understand what was happening. And I went to a mentor of mine who was a great American journalist by the name of Ed Guthman, Pulitzer Prize winner at 30, worked for Robert Kennedy, was one of his closest friends and had become a good friend of mine. And Ed was then late 70s, maybe, yeah, I think late 70s, maybe early 80s, teaching at USC. And I said, you know, shouldn't this book exist? And this is actually a classic entrepreneur story in one way. You know, it was a great pitch. And I said, shouldn't this book exist? And he said, absolutely, you should write it. I said, Ed, wait, that wasn't the way this was supposed to go. I've got 3 little kids. I'm running this group of companies. I'm not a writer. I can't do it. He said, sure, you can. And I'll do it with you. We'll co-author. You'll do one half, I'll do the other, and then we'll switch and edit each other's works. And so because of him, we had credibility with agents. Because of him, Ethel Kennedy felt very comfortable. And so it kind of grew from there. The second volume, so the first volume came out in '93, which was the 25th anniversary of Robert Kennedy's death. Second volume came out in 2018, which was the 50th anniversary. And it really was an updating and redo of the '93 version. The front part of the book has a couple paragraphs from 5 Nobel Peace Prize winners, a couple presidents of the United States, Bono, just really diverse set of folks, Bishop Tutu, on Robert Kennedy's impact on them personally or on the world or their country.
Which speaks to your network as well. I think harkens
we
back
got
to that
really
question.
lucky. That was Ed Guthman and Robert Kennedy, and I was the guy sending the emails. So.
But the entrepreneur is usually in the middle, right? He doesn't know any of those people, but ends up, you know, somehow making it happen.
Well, I was not afraid, and I really wanted that book to happen. And I didn't care if I looked foolish at it. I knew the book would end up being pretty good because I had the best editor in the country as my partner. It's like, okay, that'll work. So, you know, I wrote Mandela and I wrote Tutu, and then we ended up spending time with President Mandela 3 years later. So turned out to have a lot of interesting connections. But anyways.
What a wonderful life you've lived. You've lived, and continue to live. It's like it's amazing sitting here to understand the impact that you've had on, probably thousands of people's lives, the careers, and I think we have some time for some more questions. So, from the audience, would love to pick a question or two. Anyone?
Well, tell me more about Uplift.
Viewlift.
So we have entertainment clients, everybody from NBC Universal, for whom we handle their subscription service for children, NBCU kids. We have major television station groups who use us to launch new digital channels and also bring their local TV stations onto the digital world. We have the Italian Pro Basketball Leagues, as I mentioned. We have our teams in Washington, D.C. We have the NHL team in Tampa Bay. But we also have small independent production companies, Bollywood studios, lifelong learning companies, health and fitness. Anybody who has content that they want to stream to a global audience, although they can, on an individual piece of content basis, restrict it to where they have rights. But we help them get it out to a broad audience and make money for doing so.
And we also have a question from Zoom that we got earlier. How hard was it raising funds for Viewlift? And how do people get in touch with you about working with Viewlift? Those are two questions. I mean, yeah.
So the working with us is easiest to deal with by just saying it's rick@viewlift.com. Raising money, we are the fortunate 1/1000th of 1% because the man whose idea this company is, who is my chairman, Ted Leonsis, has such extraordinary reputation that we've raised a significant amount of money on Ted's credibility, for which I'm extremely grateful and completely devoted to making it worthwhile. That is not a path that if I were out as an entrepreneur, I'd be able to do. In those circumstances, you look for like-minded people and do it sequentially in rounds so that you can retain as much ownership as a founder as you can, but also so that you can continue to demonstrate proof points as the company is growing. And we were talking at lunch about the fact that there's just an enormous amount of money in the investment universe looking for good ideas. And I think it's easier to raise early funding now than it has been in the recent future and certainly in the past. The bar is set much higher to raise later rounds.
Yes.
Because the whole notion of scale is just astronomically different.
And later rounds, you mean like Series A, B, C, and then
B
growth
and on,
rounds.
but B and on, and then what you do to keep growing the company beyond that. When we started just this little, still pretty young company, on the web, if you had an audience of 1 million uniques in a month that were really interested in you, that was a proposition you could talk to an ad agency about. If you have 1 billion uniques a month now, advertising agencies don't care about you because you're not representing a scale vehicle for them. And so if you've got a different kind of relationship with brands so that they're engaged with the content and with your company because of that fusion, now you've got something to talk to them about. But as a startup company, you can't say, well, advertise on my property, because they go, it's just a drop in the bucket. I've got to get to a bigger audience or get to an audience that's just so rich in every sense of that word, so directly that you can sell me a small group.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
for flying over from Washington, D.C. to be here. I know everyone in person is going to be excited. Oh, we have one? Okay, we have one last question.
Have at it.
Let's do it.
Because you surf, I'm just wondering if you're good at surfing. Obviously, it's wave, but what do you see in streaming? Like, is what's coming next distracting streaming, or do you see what's coming next?
Well, I tell you, the people I'm lucky enough to be around do see around corners and what the next wave is. And they're spending time trying to learn about it by doing. So my chairman, Ted Leonsis, is very involved in the NFT world because he's the chairman for the MBA of the committee that's taking a look at NFTs and alternate expressions of varying sorts. That is going to be very interesting. I agree with you that much of what's been out in the marketplace is without kind of enduring value. And so I think the system has to start injecting that into the product. But we're also very interested in something that's on a lot of people's radar, which is the intersection between sports, live games, and the ability to do free games or gambling. In the United States, we're coming late to sports betting, but we're coming at it very fast. Right now, as is the case in many new sectors, the integration of watching a game and then acting to play free games with my friends or bet money on a game, we know that it greatly increases the stickiness of the game itself. People watch with greater intensity, they watch longer. It increases the revenue stream to the teams, which coming off of COVID is so important. But we haven't gotten yet to the product, which makes that easy to do and fun to do. And we've been spending a bunch of time in our company working on that, and I'm excited about that as a direction of technology. But I think, riding the waves really depends on being out there for a long time and looking at waves, watching other surfers, having a good teacher. And I think all of those apply in business as well. And I'm amazed by serial entrepreneurs who can do it time after time and on new ideas. I think that's just an extraordinary skill set. So I'm a big admirer of folks who've got that record.
Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Congratulations on the inaugural Techtalia.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. It was a pleasure.